And so it's the Sanctus Spiritus cross of Christ. And then underneath it'll be all this be guarded here in time and there in eternity. Amen. And I just love that saying. Put it inside there.
When you think of powwowing, you might think of the indigenous North American tradition, characterized by song, dance, feast, and friendship. But there's a Pennsylvania Dutch tradition that happens to share the same name. Gretchen Swank is a wilderness survival instructor, retired police officer, and is proud of her Pennsylvania Dutch ancestry. She's also a brauker, a practitioner of pow-wow, or braukerij. This practice includes making a brauk bag, a bag stuffed with burlap, mugwort, hyssop, and blessed with a charm for protection, as she's seen making here. Powwowing is a spiritual-based healing tradition practiced by the ethnic Pennsylvania Dutch. Braukers, or practitioners of powwow, work in healing their patients by using fluid hand motions, prayer, incantations, and household objects. It is a centuries-long practice that has undergone misunderstanding, scrutiny, and alienation from the English world, as some Pennsylvania Dutch culture, language, and customs have lost themselves with years of assimilation. But powwow isn't just practiced by those like Gretchen, who is rather open about her journey. It is a vocation that is still very alive and well today amongst the Pennsylvania Dutch, both in plain and fancy communities, and has been documented by scholars such as anthropologist David Griebel.
My professors had said that no one was practicing powwow now. The last practicing powwowers were like in the 70s. And I thought, wow, okay. But another folklore professor said, no practice ever disappears entirely like that.
Join us as we talk to PA Dutch folk experts and powwowers to understand what exactly powwow is, why it's not so talked about, and exactly who's practicing it today. We're here on the grounds of Kutztown University's Pennsylvania German Heritage Center, where we talked to director Patrick Donmoyer about the European origins of Pennsylvania Dutch powwowing and took a look at his collection of powwowing artifacts.
Powwowing is the ritual traditions of the Pennsylvania Dutch that are used for healing and for protection and for assistance in times of need. And these are comprehensive traditions that encompass a wide range of methods of healing. So there'll be everything from the use of prayer and light touch on the body, as well as ritual objects or household objects that get used in a very nuanced way in order to affect some form of transition or change for the person who's needing it in their life. You know, classic examples are like curing a wart with a potato under the light of the full moon. And so you really find a broad range of different traditions. And all of these, of course, make use of specific symbolism that tells you a little bit more about the folk cultural imagination of the people in this area, how they saw the world, how they saw themselves as part of that world, and how they related to one another. Prior to the American Revolution, there were roughly 81,000 immigrants who were German-speaking, who arrived through the port of Philadelphia and then settled in southeastern Pennsylvania. With them, they brought, of course, their language and their customs and their traditions, and a lot of the traditions among the Pennsylvania Dutch predate the Protestant Reformation. But many of these groups had traditions that were very specific to them culturally, but also related to broader patterns in Europe. And some of these have to do with the healing traditions in particular, which really relate back to old healing traditions that at one point in time were sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church.
While powwow today is practiced differently amongst various groups, there are a few general rules that braukers follow. It is typical to see the tradition pass between the sexes, where a man teaches a woman and a woman teaches a man. Braukers are not allowed to be paid for their services, and any forced payment is to be given to the residing church. And braukers are also expected to memorize incantations and prayers, as the tradition survives only orally.
You had to be able to memorize the incantations each time perfectly, and each week you came back, you'd have to be able to repeat them perfectly. And if you weren't able to do it perfectly, that meant you were not meant to be a powwower, a braucher, say.
However, anyone of any background can be powwowed, as long as they are of faith or are open to an experience of energetic healing.
What you're typically going to find is that a practitioner of powwowing is typically going to ask a person to sit in a chair facing east, and they're typically going to start with their hands working from the top of a person's head down to the soles of the feet while making a series of motions primarily to draw out imbalance from the body while making the sign of the cross over each individual organ and part of the body, and there will be accompanying prayers associated with those parts of the body and any imbalance that the practitioner might feel. Or if there's a particular ailment that the person is drawing attention to, and that might be the reason why they were visiting the powwower to begin with. That might be addressed as well. And so typically what you're going to find is that this is a tradition that can be done with very few additional elements. However, certain ritual traditions are associated with objects that might be brought in.
Despite sharing a name with the traditional Native American ceremony, the term powwow was not one the PA Dutch gave themselves. Pennsylvania Dutch powwowing does not imitate or claim the practices of indigenous powwows, but rather consists of Christian folk medicine traditions that originated in Europe.
Most people who are speaking English today are going to use the term powwowing. Originally, the word powwow is a loan word from the Narragansett languages from the Algonquin tribes up in New England. The word was absorbed into the English language by missionaries who were Puritans, who saw the Native American traditions, especially the healing traditions and ceremonial traditions, as something negative. So speakers of English who saw the Pennsylvania Dutch, who were also conducting ceremonies and ritual means specifically for healing, they applied the word to the Pennsylvania Dutch, and it stuck. So for better for worse, we've got this word that doesn't originally come from our culture, but it's broadly been accepted in this area, again, since around the 1780s.
Powwow's original term is braukerij, which, in context, means to treat people with medicine in Pennsylvania Dutch. While the two terms are used interchangeably by academics and practitioners, some Braukers, such as Swank, prefer exclusively using the term braukerij. And while Swank is one of a few local Braukers who actively practices, it is hard to come across people like her. So, why is powwow not practiced anymore? And when it is, why is it so relatively discreet? Scholars attribute the taboo stigma surrounding powwow to a multitude of factors, both within the largely Christian Pennsylvania Dutch community and the English world.
On one hand, I see that there is increasingly, I think, less tolerance within certain religious denominations, and so I think as a result of that, there are some people who maybe have been discouraged to use it or choose to distance themselves from those family stories or traditions because of that.
You know what I mean? There's some ambiguity about this practice. The idea that, in most cases, people who patronize powwowers see this as the power of God coming through them, that they're special people that are capable of channeling that power, okay? But others see it as the work of the devil.
In 1928, 3 men in York killed a powwow practitioner by the name of Nelson Raymeyer after they believed they were hexed or cursed by him. The murder, known as the York County Hex Murder, or the Raymeyer's Hollow Incident, contributed to a negative public perception of powwow, likening it to witchcraft. This event, according to experts like Kriebel and Don Moyer, led to a hushing of the practice that made it a lot less commonplace.
It's kind of a culmination of things to produce this really tragic story that I think, unfortunately, led a lot of people to say, well, in the public eye, this is not acceptable to engage in these traditions because we're going to end up being embarrassed. And that, I think, is the takeaway among the Pennsylvania Dutch. They felt as though it was no longer safe to engage in some of these traditions, especially with people outside of the culture. For people that you could talk about it in Pennsylvania Dutch, you were safe. For people outside of that, you didn't know. And so there was this real concern about being misunderstood, I think, among the Pennsylvania Dutch.
But the overall assimilation of the Pennsylvania Dutch into mainstream American culture during a time of World War I and World War II anti-German sentiment has contributed the most to a loss of the tradition.
It's really the connectivity as that breaks down. And one of the main components of that is the language. In the early 20th century, what you were really finding was a generation of parents who had gone to school not speaking any English, and many times there was, depending on the school district and the location and the teacher, there may have been more or less tolerance for that. And so these parents who felt ill-prepared, who learned English basically in the classroom, didn't want their kids to suffer. And so you're going to find this story very commonly that people will say, well, my parents didn't teach me the language, or they only spoke it when they didn't want me to understand what was going on. And the idea was that they were trying to keep their kids, like spare them the pain of going to school and having to be in an institutional setting that was uncomfortable for them. And as a result of that, so many aspects of this tradition are so rooted in the language that I would see as the single most important determining factor in the loss of these traditions in the local community is the loss of the language. Because if we're not speaking the same language, how do I tell you about those traditions?
Today, many traditional Braukers are not open about their practices. In reporting for this video, many plain Amish or Mennonite practitioners did not feel comfortable sharing their experience on camera. But in recent years, more groups have shown interest in powwowing during a more recent positive culture surrounding alternative and complementary medicine. Some, like local powwower Rob Phoenix, use social media like his YouTube channel to raise awareness for the subject. Others, like Kriebel and Don Moyer, have worked in publishing academic studies and books to debunk myths surrounding the practice.
Powwowing is being practiced today by a number of different individuals and even some groups in the area. What you're typically going to find is that there are several subsets. I know of some traditional practitioners who are in their 80s and 90s that are doing what they were taught decades ago by also previous generations of people who looked at this largely within the Pennsylvania Dutch cultural context. They're speakers of Pennsylvania Dutch language. The language is a key component to how they use the tradition. And then there's also new generations of people who are looking at this in a more flexible way. And you're going to find that these are people who are engaging in other healing traditions as well. I know of people who are herbalists who also practice powwowing. I know of people who practice other forms of energetic medicine or craniosacral work or healing traditions from other cultures as well. Pennsylvania is increasingly diverse, and so you're going to find that people are going to be using these traditions in a wide variety of different ways. I always go back to the idea that this is a culturally specific form of care and not always outcome specific, and so it's not a matter of whether or not a miraculous healing takes place, but rather that some form of really important connection, person to person connection takes place that reinforces their cultural beliefs and values. And so to me, what's happening right now with powwowing is that it's certainly not as robust as it was in the past in terms of large numbers of people practicing it, but I think there's a major resurgence of interest.
But Gretchen, who belongs to the Urglava, a pagan traditional guild of Braucherei based in Bucks County, is one of a few Braukers in the area who has shared her decade-long interest in the subject with her blog and podcast experiences.
I've always been very intuitive, especially when it comes to nature, and I discovered when I was on my journey learning yoga and Reiki that there was Braucherei in my family, but I learned that my great-grandmother on my mother's side was a Braucherin, and when my mother described to me what she observed my great-grandmother doing, I did some research. I knew that I was Pennsylvania Dutch in heritage, and so I did some research and discovered that it was Braucherei is what she was practicing, and I went off on this journey. This was about 2009, 2010, and for about 10 years I just researched the heck out of it.
Gretchen is still an apprentice after nearly 14 years of research and 3 years of practicing, and is always learning more about Braucherei. She sees clients and treats things like chronic migraines using her holistic approach to powwow.
I have actually in my bedroom a little corner for Braucherei set up, so people want to come to me to get braucht or tried for. They come to my house, I bring them into my little space, and we do it right there.
She, like many contemporary Braukers, practices powwow outside the traditional confines of Christianity, and taps into the pagan or pre-Christian elements of the tradition within the Urglava Guild. Are you a Christian Braucher, or do you adopt other practices?
I was raised Christian. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school and went to church every Sunday as a Catholic. I have a deep connection to my upbringing. I was trained in the Christian aspect of Braucherei, and actually when most of our ancestors practiced within the Christian aspect of Braucherei, and most of our ancestors who first settled here and were of the Protestant, Reformed, or plain folk, or Catholic, different realms of Christianity. So they practiced within those framework of Christianity. You can't deny there is pre-Christian roots to Braucherei. It is a syncretic practice. It brings together Christianity, it brings together its pagan roots, it brings together all aspects that flavored it along the way. So I very much have a syncretic practice. Some people choose to practice just Christian. Some people choose to practice just in the Urglava context of the pre-Christian. I choose to practice a wider, because I believe the world's a big place and that we need to look at commonalities between cultures and between people and not differences. And to say that you're wrong for doing this or you're wrong for doing that, I don't believe that that's appropriate.
Despite modern setbacks and a loss of culture that has contributed to powwow dying out, an ever-changing interest in the subject can only make one wonder what the future holds in the world of Braucherei.
The direction that powwowing is heading today is that we're seeing new generations being really interested, primarily because this is a ritual tradition that's appealing because it's outside of the ordinary. It gives people tools to encounter daily life in really meaningful ways. And oftentimes people are seeking comfort from these traditions and assistance from these traditions during difficult times, illness, times of emergency, feelings concerning protection of your physical body or also your spiritual condition, and how they're going to approach those things in their daily life based on how it relates to their heritage and how it relates to this sense of place as well, because not everybody who's interested in these traditions is Pennsylvania Dutch. So you're going to find people who live in this part of southeastern Pennsylvania or parts of central Pennsylvania or other areas who want to engage in these traditions because it's part of their community that they grew up in. And I think those are all valid things. And so for me, the direction that I'm seeing is that this tradition is adapting, and we're seeing a rate of really rapid change right now.
While the future of it may be uncertain, Broukers like Swank encourage others to learn about the practice with a particular cultural dignity, respecting the practice as a modality of Pennsylvania Dutch medicine.
It's a very deep practice. It's a very spiritual practice. It's simple. It's not difficult to learn. It takes commitment and an open mind. And you have to be willing to connect to the deepest parts of yourself.
I encourage people to engage with these traditions to the degree that they may want to investigate them, learn more about them, find out about how the culture engaged with everyday life troubles in the past, how they might learn from family members who may have also engaged in these types of things, and hopefully those experiences and stories can inform them to have an approach to their own life that might have some of these aspects of meaning, because that's a kind of an essential human thing, to have meaning in your day-to-day life and how you're approaching it. And I think that's one of the most important directions this is heading.
Because cultures lose identity when they lose their folk practices. It's about respect. When you're working with powerful energy that's connected to ancestry, that's connected to spirit, whatever that spirituality is, it should be kept sacred and it should be respected.
For Lancaster Online, I'm Brenna Sheehan.